Merrily has a wealth of information, and we're going to go through as much as we can, but we do have other parts planned for like later in December, mid-December, late December. Well, we'll keep you posted when that happens. So this is Merrily Milmoe. This is a dear friend of mine. She's been a researcher for over 40 years, and she's a fact. We met several years back at one of the Bay Area UFO conferences, and she's a wonderful supporter. She buys everything we come out with. And actually reads it. She reads it. She reads it before I do. And so she's gonna do most of the talking, and I'm gonna ask her some questions along the way. But so Merrily, how did you get started with this? Your interest in human history, ET ancestors, and inherited wounds?
Okay. Well, once I got out of college and could actually study what I wanted to, the major interest was that at about 19 and 20 years old, I realized that with friends and people I knew, there's something that seemed to be kind of off. And I narrowed those to three things. I was somewhat ignorant and naive at the time, so I'll explain that in a second. The second was that no one seemed to be thinking for themselves or asking questions or thinking outside the box or any of that level. Very, very little, even through all my schooling. And I remember sitting through science and through history and just having this inkling, nothing profound, but this inkling that there's so much more. Right. We're not being told the truth, right? Right. And then the third thing was that it just seemed that people had a habitual pattern of being just empowered, giving their authority away to authority figures. So shortly after that, I started a long career in holistic health. And in the first year or two, I was raised in Marin County. I was one of the few blessed people who had a very easy, good life, no problems, not that many insecurities, all of that kind of thing. And sheltered. So I was naive to the amount of abuse and what was going on, even though I was a very open thinker. So after a couple of years of doing body work, I realized, oh my gosh, huge amounts of people have been abused. And of course, that started me off, to answer your question, on tracking the source of dysfunctions here, especially those three that I mentioned before. And obviously, as a parent to all of us, you first track your family lineage, the habitual patterns, how you were raised, things like that. But as I kept going with clients and in my research, which was about 4 hours a night, it ended up taking me what I call off-planet, tracking the most ancient species that seem to, the 6 species that seem to be our oldest ancient beginnings as a humanoid human, and all their dysfunctions that they took on is part of what I call Earth Mastery Game. And so that's how I got interested in it.
Well, this is a whole nother take on therapy.
Yes.
Because,
exactly.
When you go to a therapist with whatever wounds and dysfunctions you've grown up with, that's, what you're going to talk about is certainly not what I would imagine most therapists talk about. So it's wonderful to have a whole nother perspective on it.
Well, one of the things I would like to say is one of the Palladian term is the psychosocial engineer, and I'm very interested in the psychological aspects. And my passion, which because both Joanne and I are thinking with Mark's permission to write a book on the agendas of the species, what their present alliances are. Now, I have found in my research that even though this topic seems far out, unrelated, I have found it integral and the source of everything that's going on this planet. From everything from dysfunctions to what's behind politics to what's behind, government to what's behind all kinds of insecurities. So, and also, before we get started, I would like to give thanks to Carrie Cassidy of Project Camelot. I have literally watched every single one of her interviews except for 5, and I appreciate what she's done. I also would like to give thanks to you, Joanne, for giving me this opportunity to come forward. This is the first time I'm publicly doing this. And to Mark for our great discussions that we've had, and patience in answering my questions.
She's very patient.
And also to the audience, for you for being so open and interested to think out of the box. And please stay with it, because I think that you will see as we track the patterns that our ancient ancestors had as wounds are the very ones that we are trying to integrate today.
Cool. I've heard you refer to the word densities and holographic reality. So can you explain and talk something about what that means? Because it might be new to several listeners. Or just me. Who knows?
Well, I'm certainly no scientist. I am more of a researcher and reporter and a synthesizer of information. And I first need to say that this information is a synthesis of research and Lyssa Royal's work. And please go to her website, LYSSAROYAL.net. She has given me permission to share it. And in the early 1980s, I came across her. And as I listened, she had a similar passion as I did around tracking dysfunctions and the true history of the human race. And I just fell in love with the material. And as I was deciding what to come forward with first, out of a huge volume of information, I felt that why not start at the beginning? So she very sweetly has given me permission to share this information. So I want to give her full credit for everything I'll be talking about today. And in terms of holograms, I'm sure all of you saw in Star Wars when the 3D image comes up of Princess Leia, right? Yeah. And it appears real. So the concept is that if we take the term source, oneness, all that is, whatever term you want to use, God, think of that as an infinite sphere, multidimensional sphere of unlimited potential and no space or time in a linear fashion. So everything's happening simultaneously. Now, for the purposes of this discussion, just be willing to contemplate, please, the consideration that what I call Earth Game Mastery could have been Source's desire to contemplate what it would be like for it to separate a part of itself off to experience what it would be like, instead of always experiencing itself as one. So when that happened, some can refer to it as the Big Bang or whatever term you want to use, when it decided to do what's called the first fragmentation of this thought. And the first fragmentation was is often termed the founders, which was a separation of itself into individual group chunks called the founders. And this was a result of it contemplating this desire. So if you can think in the middle of this huge infinite sphere, there's like a section of infinite that it is choosing to play this game of being unlimited and yet experiencing limitation for the benefits and for soul evolutionary growth. And we are it is us. We are creators and co-creators, and we are the fragments or the shards or the mirrors that have separated from oneness and have been set off to explore all there is to explore, not only for our own individual growth and evolutionary consciousness, but for the consciousness of all and wholeness. So this game primarily could be referred to as a game of integrating polarities. And so where we started from oneness, then this idea of like, whoa, I wonder what it would be like to not know who we are, to be unlimited, and play in the illusion of limitation, which all of us are doing in a third density. So densities is a term used in the way that I'm using it to basically describe condensations of matter into energy. And you can think of the colors in a rainbow, where there is a slight blending of one color to the other, but there's also separate sections. And so if we were to say densities, then we in Earth are just shifting from what's called a third density reality, which appears to be the densest we can take a physical form in human to play out what we want to play out. And evidently, which is wonderful, we have come to a part of the center of the galaxy where a combination of the sun's rays that contain photon, which is equal to light, which is equal to information, is so condensed and powerful that it is triggering our DNA encodements to slowly remember and wake up to who we are. And this is the transition from her cat is playing around.
Weird thing.
This is the transition from third to fourth density. Some say we are now in the lower part of fourth density, which is really, really wonderful. There are huge cycles that people like David Wilcock and his research, and 2 best-selling books, explains all the different cycles, 25,000-year cycles, and those are lessened into, 2,500-year cycles. And all of that works together in the entire galaxy in a rhythm, because the universe is inherently neutral. And it will balance itself out by whatever means it needs to. In nature, we call that homeostasis. So it's a very exciting time because evidently, at least in the research I've done, there are quite a number of planets that don't manage to make the very difficult transition from third density to fourth density. And they usually, at about that time, we discover nuclear power and get into all kinds of trouble with that. And so there's a tendency to blow ourselves up, which in our solar system, an example of that would be the asteroid belt, which used to be a planet, and also the huge effect we had on Mars from previous wars and other things, which is not the topic for today. So in terms of density, third density can be described as kind of ego and development of the individual identity and the forgetfulness of group identity and the oneness. And a majority of beings who are experiencing that, again, for evolutionary growth, and because they can, are usually self-serving. So in the polarity game, it is about unifying polarities. And I'm going to be talking about the 6 species who each took on archetypal, stereotyped wounds and dysfunctions to play out and to serve us as one consciousness. And you will see that these 6 major civilizations, thanks to Lyssa's work, literally encompassed almost every possibility there was. So the game is to go from union, from one, then we come forth as if Lyssa uses a great example of the old disco balls. Remember, that had mirrors all around them all the time. And then it's almost like it shatters. And then it breaks into, in our case, millions and billions of mirrored reflections, shards, fragments. And each one of those is holographic, meaning we contain the capacity and ability of oneness, which is really exciting because as we move into fourth density, these abilities begin to come online. Wow. And that has been assisted by a group known as the Syrians and Vegans, which I'll be discussing shortly. So that's the example of third density. The challenge toward awakening is huge because we agree to forget. It's so dense and the veil is so strong that we don't know who we are, and it's a huge source of suffering. And that suffering creates huge amounts of challenges, which creates huge amounts of growth. So it's the illusion of separation, challenge toward awakening, and lessons of integration. Now we're moving to the fourth density, those who choose to. So it's less service to self, which is one polarity. Oneness doesn't think of it as negative and positive in terms of judgment. And again, it's inherently neutral. You can think of negative as a charge and positive as a charge, but in this case, we're using negative for service to self, which is viable, and they're allowed to do that because if you have a polarity game, you have to have ones willing to play that, and service to others. Now, obvious, which is more of a positive polarity, and we're working on the integration rather than being so bipolar. In many of our previous lives, we are considered as a human, even though we've been many things, but as a human, that we are transitioning from, you could call it an adolescent species to early, mature, adult. The species I will be referring to when describing the ancient history were young. They were a young species, and today they have evolved. Some are playing aspects of the same tendencies and habitual patterns, but many have integrated and evolved and have learned their lessons, just like in order for us to have peace and harmony and ultimately health and, well-being, we will eventually learn to integrate. Now, integration for me, I've learned this in holistic health, it's not a static experience. It's not like, okay, I've gone here and then I've gone here and now I have to be really balanced. To me, it's like a wave. It's the ability to be dynamic. And maybe you'll be over here and then you'll go and then up there. It's almost like how energy flows in a spiral up the spine. So most of us have had experiences of both polarities. We have, if you're very adventurous, explore soul, and we have free will. So you have a choice of what you want to do and where you want to go based on your preferences and soul's growth and ability and knowingness. Most of us have tried almost everything on, and we're at a point in civilization where we have gotten to a point where we feel like we are really sick and tired of playing these same, extreme, dysfunctional, bipolar, integrative, kind of non-integrative games. And one of the funny things that ETs often say about us is they said, you humans are just like your movies. They said, you guys are so dramatic. You wait until the absolutely last, moment in desperation, and then you wing it and make it through, So it's like, it's one of the funny things they say about us. They also have another funny thing where they say, you guys amaze us because we don't get how you can manifest anything. And if you ask them why, they go, because you guys are feeling and thinking 1 to 15 conflicting emotions in the same second. Like, how does that happen? They don't get it, So we're known as a very emotional, very volatile, very extremely adaptive species. And unbeknownst to me, I just found this out because I'm an incredibly impatient sort. And I'm kind of going, can we get on with this already? Unbeknownst to me, in the last 50 or 60 years, the human species is considered to evolve 3 times faster evolving 3 times faster than most species that have gotten to this point in their soul evolution and preferably haven't exploded themselves. So I have a very positive approach. I have had to learn discernment in this study. I was somewhat naive, but I have an exceptionally positive approach. And the best arrogant way that I can describe that is that the majority of me is from the future where we're successful. So cool. So let me finish up the 4th density a little bit. So the 4th density is about responsibility and use of free will, and what I call efficient use of your sacred life force is important. You become more aware of your super consciousness. In 3rd density, we're very fragmented. We have conscious and subconscious and super conscious, and it's not like one tied together in this kind of seamless accessing, which happens more as we move into 4th density and 5th density. We maintain the ego, but we reintegrate. We reintegrate a little bit more of the group identity and a desire for more unity. Mm-hmm. And we experience the past, what we call, because in 3rd density, we set up linearity, past, present, and future, because that's part of the game rules here. Mm-hmm. And it's so we can coordinate with each other. And just like we experience each other is very physical. However, in 4th density, it becomes more fluid. And we have a greater ability to be multidimensional. We have more things like synchronicity happening. I don't know how many of you look at clocks and see 1111 come up or similar numbers like that. That happens to me all the time. And I feel that that's the way my higher self plays with me to remind me I'm on track. So, and it goes on to 5th density. 5th density, from my research, is the first density where you have more wisdom, you merge more with your oversoul, your higher self, and or your super soul, which is the name of my new website, is Super Soul Solutions. And when I got that name in a dream, I didn't even realize till I researched it that super soul is a term used in Vedic and Vedanta literature for supreme being or oversoul or higher self. Wow. So, which I consider all of us that. So, how did that go for explaining?
Shall we show them your Earth Game Mastery flow chart?
Oh, okay. So this is a chart I derived off of Lyssa's information, Lyssa Royal's information, and I'll have that on my website, which you can, copy. You're welcome to copy. And in the middle is kind of the term for source, again, God. And it shows unity to separation to unity is kind of the polarity game, and healing archetypal wounds for evolutionary growth. And out of the source being the center, you will see the right upper hand called the founders. That was the first fragmentation from source, and I'll talk about that a little bit. It's purple. The other left purple one is Arcturus. They're not directly connected with us. They often remain non-physical, but they set up the first initial magnetic grid lines on Earth to assist us, and the template for Earth. And they'll often show up to people as angelics. Then, so from the founders, you will then follow the gold line up, and above that is the Lyrans. And, well, I might as well go and talk about it as long as we're I have other pictures, but let me just do a brief overview. So the Lyrans are, when I refer to Lyrans, we are talking very simplistically and very generalized about the area of the sky, the general area, because it's not the same as ancient, thousands and thousands of years ago time, where Lyra appeared to be the first place the founders wanted to experiment with creating the human template. So now what's interesting is I used to have dreams of lions and eagles would keep appearing to me. And, 30 years after the fact of these dreams,
I found out that the Lyran symbols are the lion and the eagle and the phoenix. Of course, king of the jungle kind of thing. Now, so these are, Lyra is patriarchal and represented kind of the custodial gods for human. And I'll get into that a little bit more. Then you can see Lyra branches off to the right to Vega, and to the left Pleiades. Mm-hmm. Some of you may have heard of Pleiadians. They're kind of our direct cousins, and I'll explain why. They look the most like us. These are very general because there's all kinds of different phenotypes and physical traits at this point in each of these separate galactic species because of so much interbreeding and colonization and mixing. So please understand that this is really oversimplified and more metaphorically and symbolic. So the Pleiadians look a lot like us, and the Lyrans, by the way, are mostly Caucasian features, which is very interesting because this is where you begin to get to see the prejudices and the biases. If the founding fathers themselves tended to be light-skinned, blonde hair, then you can see, and they thought of themselves as, the supreme, you can see where a lot of the biased prejudice comes back all the way back, like the elitism and things like that, goes all the way back to the first colonization and the template for humanity. Not because that was Source's desire with skin color. Skin color is more a reflection of planets that beings have been on and adaptability and means nothing in terms of judgment. But it is interesting because we as the children, and by the way, we are they and they are us. Because in the big picture, time is simultaneous, and we have many of these forefathers and foremothers that we will be talking about reincarnated as us. Okay?
Sure.
But we're talking very early on when humanity started and they looked at these forefathers and foremothers as gods, small g, of course, and that these forefathers and foremothers, being all young species, like us, when we're young, think they know better, make interesting, not mistakes, but experiences, can be very arrogant and go through all the stages one goes through as a young species. So those are the Lyrans. Lyrans went to Pleiadians. Pleiadians look the most like us. They can easily walk the planet. They have lower earlobes, high cheekbones, light brown hair, blonde, and I have charts on all of that too. Then an offshoot of is the Vegans. The Vegans are opposite. They tend to be darker skinned, and they tend to be the maternal, not the patriarchal as the Lyran, but more the maternal archetype. Very interesting, which we'll talk about this. I am having to go through this very fast. This is a very in-depth study.
Do you want to show the
We will, but I just want to finish a little bit with this. So we're at Vega, we're the gold, and then from the Vegans goes Orion off to the left upper. Orion dark, Orion light. Think of Star Wars. Okay. I believe George Lucas was accessing this on some level because it totally plays out the Jedis and the Empire. And we'll get into that. On the right upper, also from the Vegan ancestry, came the Zeta Reticuli, which was one of the first known contacts from Betty and Barney Hill. Mm-hmm. They gave her a map of Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2 and said that's where they're from. They have now progressed into a probable future for human race as a successful half Zeta Reticuli, half human species called Essassani. And we'll get into that. Now, in the lower part under the source, you see the green go down to Earth Terra, which is us. And from the Pleiadians, They were the first that came here. Oh, by the way, so above Earth Terra is cetaceans. And you can think of cetaceans actually as the first ETs you've met. Cool. And hopefully you have. I've had wonderful experiences swimming with them, profound experiences. They volunteered to come from both the Pleiades and both Sirius as kind of an elder race onto the new planet Earth to help with us humans, the growing young species, to hold the balance, the concept of dream time, and to hold the frequency of integration until we could step forward. Because remember, at third density, we're pretty dumbed down unless you've managed to keep your psychic abilities, your full latent abilities. I know Carrie has, and many people have managed to keep that. I have found in my practice that the I hate to say it this way, but the one benefit from people who've been abused, please don't take this disrespectfully, is they have had to be so hyper vigilant that in most cases it forced their abilities to be heightened. Where this is what I have found, rather than in my case where I didn't have any of that, I'm kind of like yo-de-do-de-do. So I have to research the whole thing to find out. So anyway, so the dolphins and whales, the whales are a huge composite group soul entity, and the dolphins are individuals. And there's more to that story, as you know, Joanne, from Mark. But anyway, they're here to hold that. And now that we're moving into fourth density, or those that are choosing to move to fourth density, again, free will, as they won't have to take that role. And as you see, there's much more interaction in places like Japan, or defining dolphins as human, the other human, kind of sentient species. So this will continue, hopefully, and I'm really excited about that. Now, the one underneath Earth Terra, the Pleiadians actually came to Earth, which I'll describe in a minute, and actually took the sampling first of humans, and I'll explain why that is. The Lyrans came later and wanted to take over the whole thing. And then below that, the Sirians and the Pleiadians both worked in cooperation to empower humans. So if you can get a sense of this, you have and again, it's not so black and white, but you have the Lyrans playing out the patriarchal father who comes and goes. Again, stereotyped, he might in the old days off to work and back again, and he might be the disciplinarian, and he might, you have to do what I say, and he looks at us as, that they're the creator gods. And then you have the Vegans who didn't like that, an offshoot, and they're more the maternal, the mystical, the intuitive. Their energy is more inward. They started things like yoga and the mystic schools and the secret schools. And Lyra was more like, boom, 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 like think lion. Now, what's interesting is the Vegan symbology is the snake or serpent. And of course, which is a sign of Kundalini, and the Garden of Eden story is actually a sign of knowledge. And it's also mass consciousness' second or third major fear, which I find very interesting, the fear of snakes. And I find that most phobias and many things are all related to all these stories, plus many other species that we'll get into at a later date. But we're just trying to stay to these 6 key species. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the 6 species fairly fast. We're not going to get in depth, so I'm just going to tell you general phenotypes, generally how they look. Generally, as a young species, remember that they have shifted. Most of them have shifted in our now time, but as a young species, what energies they were holding in the polarity game that incredibly impacted us. I love this NASA photo because it reminds me of a portal. And so we're going to talk about the founders, because think of oneness fragmenting and sending these chunks of its consciousness called the founders, mass consciousness, through a portal into the Lyra. Yeah, see, so I thought this was a great image. The Arcturians, who remember are non-physical, who often show up as angelics, and who set up the Arcturian magnetic grid for Earth. Okay, and they often show up as angelics and guides.
Cool.
Okay, go next. We have a little delay here. Okay, so this is another incredible NASA slide that I found that represents to me the second fragmentation. So the first was the founders. They went into these chunks. Then they, being holographic children of Source, decided to continue the game as creators. And they were enough in touch with what the Source wanted, which was sensing the polarity game, sensing that we're going to have positive polarity, service to others, service to self, and eventually integrate it. They knew that. So you can almost think of it like a huge Big Bang. And I think this slide is so wonderful. They just like, exploded in these myriad sparks or shards of holographic, which is all of us. We are one and we are them. And then sent them off. They went off. All of us went off exploring. And the founders very carefully, as they were finishing the template for the humanoid body, which is very common in our galaxy and solar system, meaning a head, 2 arms, 2 legs, the general type, it seems to be the template that was preferred for this grand experiment. And so as they were setting that up, they gently guided these adventurous souls, sparks, to the area of Lyra as their first place, because there were 3rd and 4th density planets that were being prepared and set up for the beginning of the human species.
Wow. Okay.
Okay, so next. And this would be one representation of feline beings, which is, you could say, we're actually Lyran. Also, Lyran ancestry. Okay, next. This is the giants. Also Lyran ancestry.
Is he holding a cat?
He's like a lion.
Oh, okay.
It shows you the sign. It's a a sculpture, an ancient sculpture.
Right.
And these guys were huge. And it's another derivation of Lyrians, Vikings.
Right.
All of us are from Lyra. So, but these are just a couple of symbolic. Okay, next. And this is Lyra. This is a constellation of Lyra, which is the ancient first home of the human ancestry.
I see.
Okay.
Cool.
So you have a sense of them, and please remember that we are all here by choice to master this game, even if you're kicking and screaming all the way through it, because it is an amazing game, and all of you are courageous co-creators that have chosen many to come. There's actually several million volunteers here that don't even have to be here, but came to serve and make sure we make the transition from 3rd to 4th density. And because this is like the best game in town. It is the most challenging, and it has the most potential for evolutionary growth, both individualistically and in mass consciousness. So please don't feel you're here by mistake, even though in 3rd density it feels like that. Okay? All right, next. This is the Pleiades, 7 sisters. So one of the first groups from Lyra that decided to come to Earth were the Pleiades. And I have a funny little story about that. The Palladians are intuitive. They're generally a very attractive group. They're still Caucasian, high cheekbones, eyes, lower earlobes, like I said, sandy brown hair to blonde. And we will get to the darker skin. So in no way am I prejudiced or biased. I'm just saying, sharing what Lyssa's information has foretold. So the Pleiadians wanted to, kind of break away from the Lyrians and the authoritarian figures, and they wanted to use more of their intuition. They were very into harmony. They were very into, I had this memory of living in a domed home, even with various couples, and all children and all animals would be considered yours. So nothing would be owned. They'd come
Like
and
a
go.
communal type thing?
Yeah, kind of, but high consciousness.
Okay, right.
High consciousness. We're talking about Palladian in our present era now or future, where their consciousness is such where they're aware of oneness, so they can handle that without a lot of drama. Beautiful. So they, though, early on decided, wow, let's come to Earth. This looks like a beautiful home. And so they did. They were one of the first here. And they came at the time where, prehistoric man was developing, mankind was developing. And from, the Neanderthal jump to the Cro-Magnon jump, which happened very fast for reasons, I believe, of genetic enhancement and interference by the ET forefathers. To me, there's no question about that, because there's no answer scientifically or evolutionarily, if that's a word, for massive jump in consciousness, brain size, and everything. So they came at that time. And they had about 300 years of utopia with the common man. They were friends. They loved it. It was gorgeous, kind of like a Garden of Eden time, et cetera, et cetera. And they did take the liberty. Now, remember that every group has agendas. It's one of the things I love studying is the agendas. So in a certain way, even if you think you're service to others, if you have an agenda, which every third density and probably fourth density person has, because they're still playing levels of polarity, you have service to self. Right? I mean, there are agendas and relationships and anything. So the Palladians were a little denial of that, but what they did is they took some of the genetics from human at the time and incorporated it into them. And the reason why they did this is they were very close to being very adaptable to our atmosphere and our gravitational fields at that time, but they did it to have extra help. And all these spacefaring species that are older than us, they are always looking way ahead. And they know that too much interbreeding weakens and destroys a species. Sure. So they are always interested in updating it, enhancing, playing with it and that kind of thing. So the Pleiadians did that. And then what happened, and was coexisting there, and then what happened is the Lyrians showed up. And the Lyrians have the concept that might makes right, ownership, we're the custodial gods, we're the originators, we are the true race, we are here, we own everything, we own this. And the Pleiadians were, here's the Pleiadians' polarity. They were extremely polarized to the positive. In other words, they would not deal with any shadow part of anybody. They would not deal with darkness. They would not deal with negativity. They would not deal with any of that. So what happened is some skirmishes happened, and it wasn't full-out wars, but it was skirmishes between the Lyrians and Pleiadians. And Pleiadians kept trying to do sneaky things like get them diverted off and all of that. And it became so exhausting that very sadly, they left to find another home, which took them to the Pleiades. And however, they keep their eyes on us. They still come and go. They are our first cousins, so to speak, because of the genetic. And the things that they learned, and part of their lessons we'll get into because it was the difference between interference and assisting. We are still learning the lesson too. So that's who the Pleiadians are.
Cool. And we only have like 5 minutes left.
Oh my goodness. I will briefly state 3 of the major wounds that each of these species had that we inherited both behaviorally and genetically. And the reason why I feel that this information is exciting and important is that it's like healing a wound. If you're going to heal a wound, and we all have wounds to heal for the integration game,
right,
you want to get to the source. You want to clean the source. Once you understand the source and bring that to a conscious level, it is much easier to let it go and heal.
right.
So that's my goal, and thank you for your patience. And maybe we can't go ahead because you need to be able to close.
Well, and please share with everybody your contact information again.
Okay. So the contact information, I'm just opening up. My first website is supersoulsolutions.com. And my email is Merrily, Merrily. Yes, that was my birth name. Merrily. Yes, life is but a dream. Merrily at supersoulsolutions.com.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you, sweetie.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you so much for being here. It's
been fun.
Yes, it is fun.
I hope it's not too overwhelming to the audience. It's a lot to take in.